Good afternoon again, everybody. Aaron Keller here on Law and Crime. We are in the midst of an afternoon break in the Tex McIver murder trial out of Atlanta, Georgia. An attorney is in the defendant's chair, this time on murder charges. The state says he killed his wife on purpose. He says it was an accidental discharge of a gun that struck his wife in the back while they were in a vehicle. The woman who was in the driver's seat of that vehicle, whose testimony has been much anticipated, is on the witness stand right now. We've been listening to her testify all afternoon and indeed a little bit this morning. So we're going to talk about that quite a bit here. Adam Sostrin is an attorney in California. He's joining us as a guest on the Law and Crime Network this afternoon. Adam, good to see you again. Adam, you there?
Always great to be here with you, Aaron.
Okay, we've got you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So we're listening to this testimony from Danny Jo. She's a critical witness, and we hear her saying again and again and again that the defendant was trying to bring her into basically his version of events. Now, keep in mind, this isn't just a murder trial. It's also a witness tampering trial, and it seems like they're making out a pretty good case that at least the witness was trying to control the story. Would you agree or do you disagree?
Well, it does seem like he's trying to control the story, and I did read that there was that one individual that knew him was that his worst problem is himself. He can't get out of the way of himself. Who does that? Especially an attorney, he should know the consequences of telling witnesses to say certain things or don't say other things or leave messages, voicemails. It's truly bizarre behavior from the defendant in this case.
Yeah, I think that there's been an attempt to try to figure out the defendant's various versions of the story here. You know, you've heard insinuations that she was injured without much of a story behind it. There's all these other versions of the story that he apparently told. Now, this thing happened late at night. They had been out eating. They had been out drinking. Is there any possibility that it was just a combination of the hour and the alcohol, which the amount of which seems a little bit confusing right now? But I mean, is this just his reaction to things, or is this something nefarious?
It's so hard to say. I think people who knew the couple thought that they were pretty good together. It's a little strange. He was trying to perhaps come up with a story to explain an accident, and as a result of that, maybe he's sitting on trial. The fact of the matter being that Carter made that sort of damning statement that the car was.
Yeah, we're losing the signal a little bit, Adam. We're going to try to get back to you in a second. In the meantime, I want to listen to some of the testimony from Danny Jo Carter earlier this afternoon. Here's the moments where she describes this shooting.
Very straight.
When she sat straight up, what happened?
She just sat there for a second, and I was still waiting for the light to change.
Did Mr. McIver say anything during that time?
No.
So what happened next after Diana McIver sat straight up?
I could see out of the side of my eye, the way I can see her sitting here, and she leaned forward and started doing like this, and kind of leaning, like that.
Okay. And what happened next?
What she said?
Mm-hmm.
She said, "Tex, you shot me."
You heard her say that?
I heard her say that.
Did you say anything?
No.
Did he say anything?
No.
What happened next?
Well, for a second, less than a second, I thought it was a joke, and then I realized it wasn't, and then I knew that I had to get to the nearest emergency room.
What made you realize it wasn't a joke?
I'm not sure. I mean, I just knew that she was really, I'm not sure. I just knew it wasn't a joke.
Okay. So what happened next?
I started blinking my lights and honking my horn to see if I could get the guy that was in front of me to move, and looking for the emergency blinkers, and I asked Tex where the closest emergency room was.
Witness Danny Jo Carter describing some of the critical moments when her friend, one of her best friends, who was seated in the passenger seat, leaned forward and said that she had been shot. The jury's really going to have to pick this apart and try to figure out who was holding the gun. We know it was Tex McIver, but how he was holding the gun, exactly what position it was in, and whether or not it could have gone off accidentally or whether it could have gone off on purpose. And the only person other than the defendant who was in the car that can speak to this is the person who's on the stand right now. Now, Adam, look, I listened to some of this testimony about precisely where the gun may have been, and the bottom line is we wish this driver knew more, but she wasn't paying attention to him. She was looking at the road. So even though she was the only other one in the car, she doesn't have a lot to add as to exactly what the defendant was up to, and by exactly what, I literally mean exactly what. We wish we knew, was he asleep or was he awake? Wish we knew what position the gun was held in. Right. Wish we knew if he had cocked the gun ahead of time or not, because that last fact may be the most critical one. And she just didn't have a good enough view and wasn't paying that close of attention to know exactly what was going on.
Correct. She's paying attention to the road. Perhaps the last time she physically looked back and saw the defendant's hand was when the deceased handed her husband the gun. And that was it. And then they continued to drive, and they were talking. So she was having a conversation. So she was engaged in that while she was driving. But of course, perhaps she wasn't looking back to him. So we don't know whether or not it was cocked and ready to go, or it just went off when he woke up, or he actually just picks it up and squeezes the whole thing, and which takes a lot more energy. And it's intentional to fire. So this is a problem, and there's a lot of reasonable doubt here, and the defendant's made his story much harder.
Exactly, and I think that if this turns into a conviction, it's going to be based on the inconsistent versions of the story that the witnesses claim the defendant himself uttered to them. Now, of course, it's possible to attack that. You can turn around and say, this witness said that it was an automobile accident and Diane passed. Another one described it another way. Other witnesses seem to think that he was, coming up with stories, trying to coax people. We've got Danny Jo Carter, who seems, by all accounts, to be a very credible witness, saying flat out just moments ago that he was indeed trying to shove her down a certain road with this story. So, people might turn around and say, okay, well, the witness tampering seems like it's getting to be a much, much, much stronger case, especially with this witness. Sure. Some of the other witnesses, we can look and say, well, maybe there was mistaken impression. Maybe they misheard things. Maybe they were just walking past in the midst of the commotion in the hospital and they misheard something. You might have been able to wipe some of the previous witness tampering evidence away on those grounds, but this time around, it seems pretty clear cut that he was trying to feed her a story. So that gets much stronger. Sure. And then you have to ask the question, well, why would he be doing that? And it's going to be really hard, I think, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, for the defendant to turn around and say, oh, I just didn't know what I was doing. I was just trying to make sense of chaos. I was struggling to interpret my wife's death. That seems like it's a pretty hard case to make out.
It does. It's so unusual. And the first person you call when you're at the hospital is your good friend and attorney, who perhaps is giving you legal advice in a hallway as your wife is dying in the hospital. It's such, what this sounds like, and someone else said it. It sort of sounds like Vanity Fair. It sounds like a Tom Wolfe kind of novel about this, maybe this well-off white couple. They go into this neighborhood. Race is mixed into play. He's got his attorney, at hand. There's so many interesting facets of this case. And the most interesting bit being the defendant is his own worst enemy, and he's making it much worse for himself, which also turns it sort of into a novel. But this woman who's in the car harder, I don't see why she would have any reason to lie. It's already been clear that from her that we know that the defendants tried to feed her lines that she refuses to go along with. She also appeared to have been close with the wife who was killed in this case. So it seems that her testimony is credible. And also, one thing that helps the defendant from her testimony is with respect to the driving route, when he says, well, I wish you didn't go into this area. I wish you turned off on the 85 or turned on the 85 or whatever he said. He didn't want to be there, and as a result, that's why he asked for the gun. So it's hard to see that this is meditated, but it isn't hard to see that this is a person who believes that he needs to create a certain story to fit in order to avoid conviction, and as a result, he may get convicted on the lesser charges.
All right, Adam, we got to switch back to court. We've got the jury back in and the witness back on the stand, so let's go back.
The statement that the defendant made about listen to what I am saying, was that in reference to the phone call with Billy Corey, or was that the earlier phone call that you told us about?
The earlier phone call.
And in reference to the earlier phone call, when he said that to you, what did he say? When he said, listen to what I'm saying, did he say something to the person on the phone?
That Diane was dead, and that there was an accident and Diane was dead.
That's it?
He kept on talking. That after I heard that, my mind just kind of went. It still hadn't. I hadn't had any sleep for 24 hours. It still hadn't sunk in.
Now, can you tell the jurors during the phone call with Billy Corey, after you heard the defendant say, I can't go into any details, did you ever hear him give any version of what happened in the backseat of the SUV to Billy Corey?
No.
To anybody?
No.
Did the housekeeper show up that morning?
Yes, she did.
How about the masseuse?
Yes, she did.
What's her name?
Annie.
Annie. And the housekeeper's name is what?
Phyllis. We called her Nana.
Okay. Did anyone else show up at the condo that morning?
Not for a while.
Okay. And then?
Then there were a lot of people there.
And so how about throughout the course of that day, did you remain in the condominium with the defendant and the group of people that showed up?
Yes, until about 5:30
p.m.?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
And so can you tell the jurors what happened at 5:30 p.m.?
Janie Calhoun came home. She is a neighbor and lives next door.
And when Janie Calhoun came home, what happened?
She stayed in there for a little while and spoke to some of the people that were there, and I asked her if we could go over to her place because I really wanted to be quiet.
And were you able to go over to her place?
Yes.
And did you spend the night there?
I did.
Now, can you tell the jury, you've already told us about a little bit about some of the issues you had with alcohol. Can you tell the jurors, as a result of this, did that change?
Yes.
And I can hardly see it. Okay.
Sorry.
Explain to them how.
I decided to have a drink.
We have reached the end of the day in the Tex McIver case out of Atlanta, Georgia, with the judge saying there might be severe weather. We're waiting to see exactly if that delays the trial tomorrow morning. Adam, before we say goodbye to you, just very quickly, it seems like we're getting closer to this discussion about whether or not another will was in the works. Danny Joe, the friend of the victim, said that there were appointments apparently to change the will and that it was the defendant who kept canceling them. That seems like one of the critical links we have not yet heard. It was finally made.
Well, they're trying to prove motive somehow, so if this is the way they're going to do it, these are the discussions they have to have. They have to talk about things like wills, because that goes to the prosecution's theory of the case and an otherwise what would appear to be a very happy couple.
All right, we're going to wrap up and say goodbye. Thanks a lot, Adam Sostrin, attorney from California. Thanks a lot for joining us yet again here on the Law and Crime Network. All right. We are going to wrap up the broadcast today, folks. A reminder, as always, that we are live from at least 9 a.m. until at least 5 p.m., Monday through Friday. You heard the judge say that he's thinking possibly about a Saturday session in this case. We will monitor that and let you know exactly what's going to happen with that. But normally we extend coverage into the weekend when things like that happen. For now, this is Aaron Keller, and for everybody here at Law and Crime, have a good evening.